Everybody, I'm Hill Harper, and you're listening to Five-Factor Authentication, a podcast about our constantly evolving relationship with technology. Brought to you by Norton. Hey, everybody, welcome to Five-Factor Authentication. I'm your host, Hill Harper, and I am so thrilled to welcome our guest today. He is one of our nation's top cybersecurity and risk management experts, and his name is Chris Krebs. Chris has been at cyber's leading edge throughout his entire career, from his private sector experience at Microsoft to his public service work within the Department of Homeland Security. He's helped engineer the national strategy for digital and economic security. He's pretty amazing. I'm excited to talk to him. We're going to learn a lot. You may recognize Chris from his time as the inaugural director of cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, during which he oversaw the cybersecurity strategy for the 2020 presidential elections. No controversy there. We're actually going to dig into that. Now a partner of Krebs Stamos Group, a cybersecurity consultancy group, Chris works with a dynamic team to guide some of the world's top brands to improve their cyber resilience and ensure trust in their digital operations. Okay, Chris, this is big for me. It's great to have you on the show. Five-factor authentication is all about looking at the future of tech, looking at, where, there's that old Wayne Gretzky quote that I always talk about. He always would skate to where the puck is headed. So to me, if there's one person we've had on this show who knows or has a sense of where the puck is headed, is you. And so I definitely want to dig in. So certainly throughout your career, you've made, some headlines in the process as well. And but first, before we go back to that, let's go back to the beginning. You're an attorney by trade. I never practiced law, but I'm a Harvard Law School graduate. So I have and then you have a degree in environmental sciences. Break down to us, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, what first drew you to tech, and more specifically the cybersecurity sector?
I'm one of the first generation of kind of the post 9/11 workforce entrance. Even though I graduated college in '99, you may recall the market wasn't the hottest then, particularly in the Washington D.C. area. Government was actually a little bit smaller back then. And I just got into the risk management business. I actually worked for a maritime consultant, which means I was actually leading incident responses for oil tankers that may have accidents in U.S. waters. So it was kind of in that space. And then post 9/11, the Coast Guard, which has responsibility for U.S. waters, got rolled up under the Department of Homeland Security. And so I had some experience in risk management, in the critical infrastructure space, and as the department was setting up a new operation focused on critical infrastructure protection and resilience, I gravitated there. Kind of along the way, I decided to go to law school. I'm not sure what your rationale was for going to law school. Mine was, hey, in D.C., you kind of got to have those extra set of letters behind your name. And I felt like a JD gave me a whole bunch of options. And I was really... I think I got a lot out of law school. I think I really honed critical thinking skills, but it was probably the communications aspect and how they really put you through the ringer on your writing abilities, your verbal and spoken ability to make a compelling argument. So that was kind of law school for me. And on the other end of law school, I joined the Bush administration, actually, in the Department of Homeland Security, and worked in the part of the agency or the department that I ended up running 10 years later. Wow. So it was kind of this I kind of, by happenstance, I've always been, as a kid, interested in the security aspect of how business works, and kind of got in on the ground floor of some of the important government agencies that were established. And I kind of, even the whole point of this podcast, right, is kind of seeing things that are around the corner. I think even in 2000s, I think a lot of us recognize that the digital dependencies and connectedness that we're baking into everything, we're going to cause some problems down the road. And I saw that and really wanted to get in the middle of it and understand what are some of the decisions, the policies, the gateways that we need to clear where we can actually make a better, safer future.
So in that window, you were the director for cybersecurity policy for Microsoft. Now, when you really just think about how big and important that role is, and as far as Microsoft represents big tech, as big as anybody would think. And so as far as cyber threats and the magnitude of tech activity that a company like Microsoft is into, how did you think about that role? And is it about breaking things into smaller chunks and pieces? And then I'll follow on that. Well, how did that private sector experience impact the way you approached public sector? Because again, it feels like Microsoft's a private company, but has so many things going on. Obviously, government has so many things going on. How did you even approach your work there in terms of being able to cover all the bases that must fall under this massive umbrella of cybersecurity policy for Microsoft or the U.S. government?
So, whether it was in the formative years of high school and college or throughout my career, I've always kind of landed in a spot where I'm making connections between different groups and trying to bring people together, translate, compromise, building, look for ways how we can get disparate groups towards success. And so the role at Microsoft was about sitting in the Washington, D.C. area, understanding what policies are coming from from Congress and the Hill, what legislation may be coming, what policies or regulations may be coming from the executive branch, the administration, and then distilling that down into understandable bite-sized pieces for the engineering side. And so it's the early days of cloud computing in 2014 or so. It's helping them say, hey, look, I understand where you're going with this product roadmap and the security engineering concept that we've all laid out, and how we're going to make money off of that, and how we're going to provide services. But you have to understand that governments have interests and equities as well, and we've got to figure out how to bring those together so that we can still have a product that makes a lot of sense for the users, but it's also compliant with what the government needs from a security, safety, privacy, and transparency.
Okay, so this is interesting to me. I want to dig a little deeper right there. So what's the flow there? Is the flow you understanding what legislation's coming out and what government will allow, and then communicating to the engineers, this is what's allowable? Or is it really the engineers out there trying to push the envelope as far as possible, and you then trying to figure out, does this fit? And if not, can we talk to a certain legislator to say, hey, here's some things we're developing. We'd like to see government support this for X, Y, Z reason. Like what order does that happen in terms of the government versus the technology that gets developed?
Well, it depends, of course, which is always the safe answer here. But it's absolutely both sides of that coin. It's both about pulling requirements into the organization so that it can inform that product roadmap and the engineering piece of it, but also helping government understand, hey, that policy you're contemplating is going to have this sort of effect on industry and U.S. innovation in the global market. Now, there's an entire team of lobbyists that go out there and deal with the, kind of that gumshoe, walking the hill, doing the office meetings and visits things. But there you have to have that push and pull. You have to inform the process on both sides. I mean, I remember the early days of cloud and going and meeting with the engineering teams and saying, again, here, this is what the government is looking for. And the engineering teams would kind of look at you a little confused, and they're like, but that's not how cloud works. It was like, well, do you want to sell to the government or not? So it's everybody's making informed decisions, adjustments directionally to product roadmaps, and you've got to have someone in the middle of that understands which way the winds are blowing, and so you stay ahead of problems, and you don't have to deal with massive compliance requirements on the back end because you didn't think through what that strategy was.
Understood. And I would suggest, like you had mentioned about law school, the critical thinking skills that you kind of developed in law school help you kind of navigate that and also, like you said, communicate with folks on the Hill. So let's talking about your role in politics and on the Hill. Let's talk about one of the most defining moments of your career and certainly our nation's most recent history, which is the 2020 presidential election. As the CISA director, you were the administration's most senior individual for ensuring the cybersecurity of the election. And as you know, obviously many of us know, you were removed from your position because you would not classify election results as compromised or fraudulent. And could you first provide us more context about your role in the election and about the technological infrastructure necessary to conduct secure, fair elections?
Yeah, so I just kind of like happened into this whole situation.
Oh, okay.
I was not seeking out.
You stumbled into something like no.
It's kind of a crazy situation how it all happened. So I came into the Trump administration in the spring of 2017. I was coming in to help the new leadership there kind of understand what they had on their hands from a cybersecurity perspective and how to make the improvements and keep the programs going forward, because you need political leadership in there.
When you say the cybersecurity perspective, you're talking about cybersecurity for the U.S. government vis-a-vis even foreign threats and all sets of threats.
So I mean, there's a pretty diverse set of agencies in the U.S. federal government that have responsibilities in the cybersecurity space. So at the Department of Homeland Security, the agency that I ended up leading and that is there now, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is kind of the best way to think about them is that they are the civilian cyber defense agency. So they're the ones that work with the federal government agencies and the U.S. private sector, the state and local governments, to help them understand what the threats are and help them improve their cybersecurity posture. There are others, including the FBI, that go and do criminal investigations, that they go out and say, hey, that company was hacked. We're going to come in. We're going to take a look at what happened, try to figure out who the bad guys are, and then go try to arrest those bad guys. Sometimes those bad guys are agents of foreign governments like the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans. I could go on. And that's where you have the intelligence community that's really kind of peering into their networks to understand what their plans are and how they're operating. And then you also have the military, operating out of the Department of Defense of the Pentagon, known as Cyber Command, that are actually on network trying to disrupt them. They're helping and supporting the Ukrainian government, for instance, right now, try to defeat Russian cyber attacks.
And then within that, I think there are also private companies that are hired by different government agencies to do that work as well.
There are contractors that help set up the networks that can do threat intelligence, which means they'll do an incident response and they'll do some research and understand what that set of foreign government actors are trying to do, what their techniques are, and how to best defend against them. So yeah, I mean, private sector absolutely fits in and plays into the broader cyber defense and cybersecurity community. In fact, I'd suggest that most of the kind of available information out there on digital threats, on cybersecurity threats, actually originate from the private sector. I mean, think about Microsoft and think about the visibility they have globally, the number of Windows devices that are out there. Think about Apple and the number of iPhones that are out there that may be getting, hacking attempts every day. So a lot of this information originates in the private sector, and there are firms that have grown up in that space to understand what the bad guys are doing, and then let's put a stop to it. And yeah, sometimes it takes government action to impose costs and create some kind of deterrent effect. So you're not going to do that anymore, and it's going to be too painful for you to continue that.
Wow. A couple really, really important questions that I have. And I think a lot of people are thinking this, and so that's why I really want to ask it. How can we maintain public faith and trust in our technological infrastructure, especially with regards to institutions such as elections and our governing bodies?
Yeah.
How can people trust something that they can't see and touch, and they have to believe someone's word that it is secure, safe, etc., or they believe someone who's out there saying it's wrong, it didn't work, it's a lie? How do we secure public faith and trust? What do we do when it comes to our tech?
So I think this goes back to the story I started telling, but when I came in early 2017, I didn't know really much at all about elections. I probably had the average Americans' understanding of elections, that you register to vote, you show up at your precinct, or you mail in an absentee ballot if you can't, and then you wait for the results to come in. And then, there's a process where the president gets inaugurated. So elections, whether it's a lack of civics education or whatever, we've kind of lost sight of how these things work. And so one of the things that we had to focus on at CISA was working with those that administer elections. And just so we're all on the same page, right? It's state and local governments. Elections are administered at the county level pretty much across the country, not at the federal level. The federal level provides resources and some standards and additional support. So what we had to do was match this really kind of exquisite cybersecurity expertise with a really fundamentally distributed model of elections. And we're talking like middle of nowhere sometimes, flyover country in the United States, that you have officials that do elections kind of as a part-time job that are thinking, why the heck would the Russians want to mess with me where I am? And so we had to bring that, hey, here's what the bad guys are thinking, here's what they can do. And so we need to work together to make sure these things work. So that gets to kind of the last part of your question is, what do we need to do here going forward? The key is transparency. The key is communications. What I have seen over the last couple years is more and more public engagement by election officials on how elections work, about how your ballot gets mailed out and how you can track it online. And then once it's received, you can see where it is in the process. A lot of jurisdictions now have online tracking of where your ballot is. And things like that make sure that you have increased understanding of where the process is. But ultimately, the thing that we were shooting for in 2020, and the thing that I think we really need to ensure we have going forward, is evidence-based election. So a piece of paper, a ballot that has your vote on it, that can go back and be counted time and time and time again. And that's what we saw in the 2020 election. Georgia counted their ballots a couple times. And it's because they had a piece of paper that they could go back and touch and publicly show that there's a ticket here, there's a receipt.
Right. So I mean, in the op-ed for the Washington Post, you described the 2020 election as the most secure in U.S. history. And if we think about 2024, describe what vulnerabilities really remain, what they really are. And second of all, I think I'm hearing you say that having an electronic digital component that's married with a physical component creates almost like a double back of security. So you have your receipt. You know that you paid with your credit card, but do you have a receipt that proves that what you bought, right? And so those two things working together ensure a heightened degree of security. Should people be walking with a copy of how their votes were registered, and then the voting body or the collection body keeps that copy so there can be a double match?
No, because that then breaks the secret ballot concept, right? No one can go establish how Hill Harper voted in the 2020 election other than what you have put out there publicly. You can't connect the dots there. And that's an important part of maintaining, I think some of our freedoms here. But the key takeaway is that technology is used in elections for two reasons, at least as I see it. First is to increase efficiency. So you can get more people through the process as quickly as possible so that you can communicate the results in a trustworthy manner. The second is accuracy. Human tabulation of ballots is prone to error. And when you talk about computer and machine-based tabulation, assuming the technologies operate as intended and designed, you're talking like near zero errors. So they're much, much more accurate. But again, you've got to have that ability to go back and check your work. You should never have technology, software, or hardware in a position that there is a single point of failure. But just to be perfectly clear, going back, whether it's 2016, 2018, 2020, whatever, we've never seen an adversary in a position to be able to change a single vote, whether that's at the county level, at the state level, or elsewhere, that we've never seen them with that sort of ability. And so when we talk about our confidence in the security of the 2020 election, it was based on our understanding of what the adversary was trying to do, relationships and connectivity with our state and local partners. And it was our constant monitoring of the threat environment. And we didn't see really on election day 2020 as much as a sneeze out there. And the way I described it was just another Tuesday on the internet.
And now, a message from LifeLock.
No one can prevent all identity theft or monitor all transactions at all businesses, but LifeLock by Norton makes it easy to help protect yourself. So call 1-800-LifeLock or go to lifelock.com and use promo code 5Factor. That's lifelock.com, promo code 5Factor to save 25%. Protect yourself with LifeLock.
And now, back to 5-Factor Authentication with Hill Harper.
As we kind of close the book on talking about election fraud, election security, I think this is one of the most important conversations that we can have, particularly, I think our country is the greatest country in the world because it's a participatory democracy. But if people are losing faith in the election process, which is the underpinning fabric of what a democracy is, then we're in trouble. And so talk about the vulnerabilities and talk about how do we restore public trust and faith. And you were kind of mentioning that certain groups are attempting to take advantage of certain things in terms of public perspective. Can you speak about that? Because that's also using a different type of technology to spread information, right? That if you can sort of break people's trust and faith in something that is actually trustworthy, then inherently it's not trustworthy anymore, right? Just on its face, if that's public opinion. I would love for you to lean into that.
I mean, look, I think that's where we have to start this conversation, right? First and foremost, we need the supposed adults in the room, those political leaders, whether candidates for office or the political leadership, to actually take democracy seriously, stop using fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, for political advantage. I mean, the incentive structures are completely upside down right now, where you can lie about what's going on in the world, whether it's in a state election or whatever, and you can fundraise off of it. And you can use it, you can go on TV and talk about it and get attention. And what happens is it just resonates within the echo chamber, and it just builds up, it builds up, it builds up. I mean, you have entire candidates out there running for office on the lie that the 2020 elections were hacked or stolen by massive fraud, despite, an attorney general saying, no, that's not true. States that have conducted investigations, it's not true. We're yet to see anyone actually provide legitimate evidence that there was any sort of manipulation of the vote that would have been enough to tip an election. So first off, again, it goes back to senior leaders, those that we are supposed to be looking up to as leaders of this country, to take democracy seriously.
If you're willing to sink the ship, just to promote yourself or to kill the captain, so to speak, or whatever metaphor we want to use, how do you stop that? Because part of this is a big tech reality, right? Part of what gives someone the ability to stand on a massive, have an echo chamber, as you say, or a soapbox to say, I'm going to get attention on this massive social platform by saying this, this, and this. It does it. You sit back and it breaks your heart, but this person gets all this attention and potentially gets elected. How do we deal with that? Is it a big tech thing? Do you start wanting them to look at how they promote people or who they promote or not promote? Because then that gets to be a slippery slope, right? What can we do? Do we just teach people better discernment to be better for the individual has to figure out what's a lie and what's truth, or how do we do it? What do we do?
I don't think it's a big tech issue, and I certainly don't blame the users, right? We should not blame the people that have been sold a bill of goods, that have been lied to. I mean, that's one of the things that I think Congressman Kinzinger with the January 6th committee, as well as, Liz Cheney, Congresswoman Liz Cheney has talked about, is like, you've been lied to. I understand. We've got to have some compassion and empathy for people that someone they voted for, someone they believed in, has been lying to them all along about the election. It goes to, we have to hold them accountable. You can hold them accountable at the ballot box to make sure they do not get an election. If you actually look at some of the numbers right now around those candidates for office that have run on a 2020 stolen election claim in primaries in 2022, whether at the state level or for Congress, they actually have not fared all that well. It's not 100% they've all lost, but most of them haven't fared too well. But all it takes is one. All it takes is a governor in Pennsylvania, for instance, that runs elections to win that race, like Doug Mastriano, and be in a position to decertify 2020, whatever that means, or put in certain draconian voter restriction rules that could affect turnout for 2024, or to be in a position to certify the election in 2024 or not certify the election. So again, we can hold them accountable at the ballot box. We also need their peers to enforce a little bit of decorum, maybe. I mean, we're not seeing pushback within the halls of Congress against those that promote campaign, 2020 big lie themes. We need more of peers holding themselves accountable. And then, we need down at business leaders to engage here and not contribute funds, not contribute donations to those that continue to push these lies. So there are ways to do it. But if we're relying on big tech, if we're relying on social media to enforce this, it's just not going to be in the cards right now. And we don't even have a real measure, I don't think, to measure that because of the lack of transparency in the way these platforms are administered and managed. And I think that's where the Congress needs to start, not by dictating what is acceptable language or behavior, because we have First Amendment protections in place. Instead, let's get to a common playbook for the sorts of things that social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, need to disclose to researchers, to Congress, and to regulators so that we understand what they're prioritized for, and then that can inform follow-on shaping behaviors.
Okay, so extending from that, let's now move out of politics and go into tech itself. So from your vantage point, how would you describe the way tech in general, big tech, startup tech, blockchain, whatever area or all these areas combined, Web3, how would you describe the way tech is impacting our society, one? And what are the consequences of these changes, two? I'll just leave you with those two first, and I have a few other things to lean into as far as we see this world of technology and moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, look back over the last 150 years or so at how information availability and the volume of information available to us has changed. I mean, think back to several hundred years ago in the Gutenberg press, right? Now you had people that had the ability to print books, print leaflets, print journals and articles and other treatises at scale. It took about 100 years after the Gutenberg press to really get sort of journalistic standards in place. And then you move forward to things like the telegraph, and then the mimeograph, and then television, and then the internet, and then social media. So you keep seeing this stair step up of information available. And I think we right now are in an absolute explosion of information around us, to the point where we've actually probably, it's more, there's this concept of information disorder. There's a researcher, Claire Wardle, that has coined it as, we have misinformation. That is information that is not necessarily, that is false, but it's not necessarily being used intentionally for harm. So that's where, we might repeat something we heard. We're not repeating it because we're trying to hurt somebody. The opposite of that is actually disinformation, where it's false and you still promote it because you want to hurt the person. And then malinformation, which is more about taking real information and releasing it out to damage someone. So, again, the information available to us right now, it's overwhelming. We're losing trust in the mainstream media at the same time that we're seeing underinvestment in the collapse of local media. So then we have to go to lower quality sources at the national level. And so it's a real complex situation. You mentioned something earlier about, do we need users, do we need to teach them to have more discernment? And ultimately, yes, we're responsible individually for the decisions we make based on the information provided to us. but it's damn hard, man.
And to that point you just made, I have a good friend that works at YouTube, and she told me that on a daily basis, the amount of content uploaded to YouTube, it would take any one person 88 years to watch what's uploaded every day.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, it's a mind-boggling amount of stuff. And also you buttress that with the fact that someone showed me a demo the other day of how technology allows someone to take their voice, like they could take this podcast that we're doing right now, take both of our voices, run it, type up content, run our voices through this program that they have, and our voices, as recorded, would read the content that they typed up. So therefore, they could make Hill Harper or Chris Krebs sound like Hill Harper or Chris Krebs and literally say whatever they want to say. And so how can someone even have some discernment around that? I mean, because it's like, well, that sounds like Hill Harper's voice, but he's saying some crazy stuff that I wouldn't expect Hill Harper to say. What do we do?
What I've compared this to is almost a post-Enron moment. So you think about the early 2000s, you had the collapse, the accounting collapse of Enron, the Texas-based company. And in part, the issue was that there were not rigorous disclosure requirements and transparency into how they were handling their accounting and their finances. And it's a similar sort of thing, I feel like, what we're talking about with some of the social media platforms, whether it's YouTube, Amazon, Twitter, whatever, or, I'm sorry, Facebook or Twitter or whatever. There is not a consistent way of viewing what are the moderation policies that these companies have. What are the reach? How do we measure reach? How do we look at once they've actually taken action? Can they retain some information for follow-on analysis? Are there certain areas that maybe don't deserve or shouldn't be provided certain legal protections through what's known as Section 230, where the platform is not a publisher? So there are things I think we can do to improve the quality of social media platforms, but it's going to take congressional action, and congressional action right now is, every day we watch the news, is not something that you can make any sort of bets on by any means.
Right. And so speaking of that, let's transition now into the individual protecting themselves. How aware do you think people are about their safety and privacy online? And are folks, do you think, doing enough to protect themselves? And from your observation, what's the number one cyber threat facing Americans today?
Well, I mean, look, whether people are aware of their privacy or of the security implications of the thing they do, or they just don't care, there's a significant amount of overlap, right? People will give away personal information for a free app on their phone or whatever they're doing online. People make these transactions and accommodations all the time. I think one of the issues we have is that it's just not clear on the side of technology providers of what's actually being collected, how it's being used or monetized, and where it goes next. I mean, if you've ever read a term of service or an agreement form on the front end of an app or the front end of any sort of software, it's 5 pages long. It's legalese. Right. It's hard to understand.
So most people just hit accept, or they also accept the cookies. I still don't know what accepting cookies means, so I don't, I know what it means, but you know what I'm saying.
Somebody's tracking the things you're looking at online is basically what that means, and they're using that for advertising purposes, and they're coming at you with very, very targeted advertisements as a result of your browsing history. And that's all really sensitive information that could disclose a lot of things about you that maybe you don't want to be made available, that could actually put you in a very significant risk. What if you are in a state that has outlawed something recently, like, abortion, and you are researching information about abortions, right? You could have a state that then serves a warrant on an internet service provider or a search engine to get information on you and whether you were doing something in violation of law. So the data that we're the exhaust that's coming off of us because of our devices every single day can be used for financial gains, but also for something, in my view, much, much more nefarious. And that's why we have to be mindful of the things we're doing online, the services we're using. I think, think pretty deeply about, do you need to use a privacy-focused browser like Brave? Do you need to use a VPN? There are things that we can do to take down and minimize that exposure and that risk.
So will you break down some of those? And just for folks who may be listening who aren't aware of even what a privacy browser is, or are not aware of what a VPN is, could you break down some of the things people could think about doing, some of the tools that they could think about using if they think that is so important?
Yeah, I mean, so first things first, right? On a social media platform, whether it's Facebook or whatever, if you're logged in, if you're posting as yourself and you put something out there, look, the internet's forever, right? I mean, I hear examples of kids that were using Twitter almost as a direct, not a direct message, but like a text system. And then as they're going in for job interviews, you just look for their profile and you can see things that they're talking about and parties they were going to and acting like fools. All that stuff that's out there. So you really have to be mindful of what you are representing about yourself, the things you're putting out there, the thing you're talking about. And you got to be okay with it. And I tend to look at this as like what's known in DC as the Washington Post test. Don't ever tweet anything. Don't ever text anything. Don't ever put anything in an email that you wouldn't want to be on the front page of the Washington Post. And if it was out there, you wouldn't be terribly embarrassed.
Yeah, but Chris, you know that the level of discipline and discernment you need to be able to operate that way. Most people want to live their life a little bit more free and not have to be in their head about thinking about all those things. So they'd rather use some type of tool to protect themselves from themselves, in a sense, right?
Yeah, but
I mean,
okay, so we're going to get to the tools.
Uber is that tool for people who don't want to drive drunk, right? It's like, should I go out and have a bunch of shots? Well, that may not be so good for me in the first place, but I'm going to go have the shots anyway, but I don't want to drive drunk, so I'm going to use a tech tool to help me not do that.
So this is a great example. Hill, I'm with you, but again, the digital world's still the real world. I mean, if you wouldn't go to the grocery store and start screaming about stuff or whatever, like, you got to be mindful about what sort of activities you're engaging in and how it could be collected, right? Okay, so to your point about the tools, yeah. So a privacy browser is something that's not going to track your online behavior. It's going to put a block or a shield between you and whatever that website is, in where you might be going to look for something, where you may be buying something. Another thing you can do is use credit cards. I would always use a credit card. This is more from a security perspective. If that number gets hacked, if somebody steals your credit card number, you have protections with a credit card company that you don't have if you're using a debit account, right? A debit card comes straight out of your bank account, and there aren't necessarily fraud protections built in like there are for a credit card. You have different set of rights with a credit card. A VPN actually masks where you're coming from, your basically your internet protocol address, where you're beaming out from effectively. You can use a VPN, a virtual private network is what it's called. And it can say, hey, even though I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., I'm going to log into this VPN. It's going to look like I'm beaming out from Seattle, Washington. So it gives you a little bit of additional kind of obscurity, and puts, again, a bit of a screen between you and somebody that may be tracking data on the other side of that internet handshake.
Okay, so I know you're super busy, so I don't have much more time with you, but I could talk to you forever about this stuff. I'm going to move to our kind of last round here. So, despite all the changes, in tech and how quickly the world's moving, as you were alluded to earlier, it feels like that we're on the brink of a whole new online world with momentum behind virtual reality, augmented reality, digital spaces like the metaverse, Web3, blockchain technology, all of these words that people hear. Now, your current company, Krebs Samos Group, publicly states its commitment to a better, safer, and more secure technological future. So let's talk about the technological future. Give us your predictions. What does this technological future look like? What will be the leading challenges over the next 10 years? And how can tech play a role in solving them?
So in general, the way I see the world going is we're only plugging more things in. There will only be more connected devices in our homes, in our business, in our cars, on our body, in our bodies. Wherever you go, you're going to have more technology dependencies. Automation, whether it's our vehicles that are going to be self-driving cars, whether it's the things in our homes like lights and sensing and all this other stuff, that is all going to be connected. That's all going to generate usage behaviors, metrics, telemetry, digital exhaust, right? So the attack surface, which means the opportunities for bad guys to exploit those digital connections, are only going to increase. And when you add on top of it, there are more bad guys out there because more people have the ability to connect to the internet. There are more people that see that they can make money doing crimes online. I mean, ransomware alone has just exploded over the last 4 or 5 years because it pays, and there aren't a whole bunch of penalties just yet for that dude sitting in Russia that's hacking a U.S. company. So more surface area, more attackers. The good news is, as I see it, is the people problem is getting better. And what I mean is we have more folks that are aware of digital risks than every subsequent iteration of leadership in technology companies, in the policy circles, in our nation capital, in our state capitals, and elsewhere, are more aware of the risks around us. Now, unfortunately, it's going to take more and more events like Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack from last year that disrupted gas supplies on the East Coast to wake people up. But we are waking up. And as a result, products are getting safer in each iteration. There are also more products available, I think, to secure the things around us. I mean, there's a vibrant cybersecurity product market. So things are getting better, but there's more of it, and there are more bad guys going after it.
So a couple things that I've heard that I think is, I've never heard somebody really talk about this idea of digital exhaust, but that's a really beautiful metaphor for me visually to understand what you're talking about, that we're putting out all this digital exhaust, and then people can come along and grab this part of it, grab this part of it. Some do it for ads and to create commerce, but other people could be doing it to sort of make me vulnerable and grab my identity, grab my debit card number, all of these things, which has actually happened to me. Can you break down what specific, for somebody who's listening to this or watching this, what specific security measures should the individual person be taking to ensure their safety online?
So what I would do is make sure that I'm using a modern device, right? If I'm using something like an iPhone, I'm using an iPhone that's within the last 2 or 3 generations. Same thing goes with an Android device. Try to keep on a modern device that is more recent, right? And keep the software updated. If it says update, is available, update it. They don't love pushing
even somebody,
out updates.
let me say this, even people are afraid of that, because oftentimes I've heard people say, well, it's asking me to hit this button and update, but how do I know that's that's real and it's not someone trying to hack my phone by having me hit update?
Well, I mean, so, I'm more familiar with an iPhone, and with iPhone, it's pretty easy. You just go into the settings, you go into general, go to software update, you hit update and install. So you're doing it on device. It's not, a text message that's coming in or an email that you're getting. Right. You have to go into the controls, into the settings.
Yes.
So that makes it easy. But make sure it's on auto update. And then I would do the same thing, frankly, for any of the apps that you have installed within your app store. Make sure that it's set to auto install. I'm less worried these days about kind of like connecting to Wi-Fi at Starbucks or anything like that. Make sure you're on the lookout for what's known as an HTTPS connection, so that you're not just transmitting stuff over the air unencrypted. That S means secure. So you want that connection that has the little lock on it. That's not as big of an issue as it was 5 years ago. One thing that I think everybody really needs to do, particularly for sensitive accounts, financial accounts, bank accounts, email accounts, any public, social media type things like Twitter again or Facebook, multi-factor authentication, right? 5-factor authentication, you got to have at least 2. Password, and then I like the authenticator apps that are available on these devices. I like the ones that you pull it up, it gives you a code, generates a code, and then you type it in to the browser or whatever. Text message based authentication, it's still prevalent, but it's not really recommended as the go-to. It's better than nothing, but you really want to start hitting those authenticator apps as best you can. But for the super sensitive stuff, probably not in your personal life, but in more of the the business settings with the high value assets or the really important the VIPs, you want to use a token like an RSA token. The last thing I'd say, and this is for is you're starting to experiment, you're thinking about a device like a wearable for your kid or something like that. Buy brand names, buy names that you recognize and have a degree of trust because they've been around for a while. If you recognize them, that means they've been around. I've had the hardest time trying to buy wearables, smart devices for my kids. But you look on Amazon or whatever, you're like, I've never heard of that company ever. And I don't feel comfortable if I don't know who they are. I don't know what they stand for. So, you want to find those companies, those brand names that you recognize that'll be around for a couple years to make sure that there's an update.
Excellent. So this one's going to be kind of tough, and you may end up repeating yourself, but it puts you on the spot a little bit. But 5-factor authentication, we want to end with narrowing down to just 5. What are your 5 most important factors for living a full life offline as well as online in our technology-driven world? What would you say the 5 most important things are?
All right. So number 1, know who you are, right? Figure out what you stand for, figure out what your principles are, and live by them, right? Don't ever have any questions about who you are, what you stand for. Really figure out what's important to you, what your values are, and you live your life accordingly. I think a part of that, if you've got a support network, not everyone does, but support networks, friends, family are critically important. Build them up. Make them a key part of your life because if you ever need them, it's always a great thing to have to make sure that you bounce and you don't kind of splat. The third is life's too short to eat bad food. So eat good food, whether you're cooking it. I love cooking. So whether you're cooking or you're going out, and like we can have who has the best fried chicken sandwich right now. I'm a big Popeyes fan. I think it's better than everything else out there. But enjoy your life.
There's a couple places in Seattle that are like bespoke fried chicken places that, I don't know, but we'll see. Maybe I'll send you something. And but you're cybersecurity. You would never give me your address, but that's a whole different thing. Okay, keep going. That's number 3.
All right. Number 4.
Number 4.
You may have to bleep me out here, but life's too short to work for assholes, right? make sure that you respect, that you trust. And again, I say this, I've had luxuries in my life where I've been able to kind of pick and choose where I wanted to work. But don't compromise yourself for those values just to get the paycheck. Again, easier said than done. But look, if you're a good person, you stand up for yourself, you're gonna have opportunities out there. And then last thing, don't read the comments, right? Don't worry about what people say about you. Again, life's too short to be worrying about what everybody else is saying about you. Just don't give them any ammunition, of course. But you do you and keep going.
I love it. Well, listen, I know that you're speaking at the featured speaker at a big cybersecurity hacker whole thing called DEF CON, I think it's called, in Vegas. I'm excited to hear what you're going to say. I think that 5-factor authentication has to go down there and be present. So hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you in person. I'm down there. I'd like to get down there and interview and meet more people in this world. that are doing a lot of different things. I really appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate your energy. Love those 5 recommendations. And Chris Krebs, thank you. You've officially been 5-factor authenticated.
Thanks, Hill. I appreciate it.
How can you fight disinformation on social media? It starts with being selective about who you follow and knowing the tells of fake news, such as spelling errors or odd grammar. For more tips on how to fight back against disinformation, visit 5factorauthentication.com/Chris Krebs.
Wow. I don't know if you guys are blown away like I was from this conversation with Chris Krebs, but this is what 5-factor authentication is all about. And here are my 5-factor takeaways from my conversation with Mr. Krebs on election security, cyber safety, and the digital imprint we leave online. And believe me, this only scratches the surface of our amazing conversation. Factor 1, the roots of modern cyber safety practices are actually older than you think. Okay, what does that mean? It means the digital world, yes, is relatively new, but principles of risk management and the protection of critical infrastructure are not. So as businesses and agencies went online in the early 2000s, it was already apparent to some that our digital connectedness also meant interdependency, and they started to work to a clear path to a safer future even back then. Factor 2, cybersecurity isn't just about technical protections. It's about influencing hearts and minds. So securing our election system in 2020 was as much about convincing part-time local election commissioners in small counties that they were vulnerable, that they may be at risk for Russian intervention, as it was about cultivating world-class cybersecurity expertise. To preserve the integrity of our elections, we need to continue to take action on all fronts. Yes, monitoring, educating, and connecting with local partners in service of our shared mission, democracy. And that leads to factor 3. In an age of information overwhelm, participatory democracy depends on our leaders taking it seriously. You know, there's more content uploaded to YouTube in a day than a person could consume in 88 years. Yeah. Amidst all that noise, all that content, some political leaders are scoring points by sowing fear and doubt, knowing it will reverberate in the echo chamber. We need to hold them accountable for those choices at the ballot box. That's how we actually make our democracy work. Factor 4, vulnerability is not a foregone conclusion. There's some really concrete things we can do to protect ourselves. 1, use complex passwords. Keep your software up to date. Use a VPN and download a multi-factor authentication app. If it's a 5-factor authentication, that's really secure. And if you're able to, buy and use electronic devices that are relatively new from brands you trust and keep them up to date. Factor 5, as we put more of our personal data online, beware of your digital exhaust. What does that mean? It means that everything we do online leaves a trail, especially if you accept all those cookies. And we need more disclosure from big tech about what they really do with our data and who they share it with. But in the meantime, remember that what you search for, listen to, post about, can and likely will be used in one way or another against you or maybe for you, depending on what you want to buy, shop, or consume. You're connected when you're online. Remember that, and remember to protect yourself. And that was my 5-factor takeaway from my riveting conversation with Chris Krebs on how we can all live more securely in our digital world. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And for more really cool, hopefully fun and intelligent takeaways and conversations, please check out the 5-Factor Authentication Show. We're so proud of what we're building here with 5-Factor Authentication, and we hope you're getting something from it. In fact, hit me online at Hill Harper Instagram. Hit us anywhere you find this. Give us feedback, like it, support it, follow 5-Factor Authentication. We believe in you, we trust you, and we thank you. We're building a community here with 5-Factor Authentication. We thank you for listening. God bless.